For now, BBC Two joins up with BBC Parliament.
Order. Statement, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Secretary Dr. Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to make a statement on the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant. As the House knows, on the 28th of July, following a decision by the board of EDF to approve the final investment decision of the £18 billion project to build a new nuclear power plant in Somerset, I announced that the government would carefully consider all elements of the project before entering into a contract with EDF, and that we would make a decision by the early autumn. I can announce today that the government has decided to proceed with the first new nuclear power station for a generation. However, this decision is made with two important changes. On the Hinkley project itself, the government will now be able to prevent the sale of EDF's controlling stake prior to the completion of construction. This agreement will be confirmed in an exchange of letters between the government and EDF. Existing legal powers and the new legal framework will mean that the government is able to intervene in the sale of EDF's stake once Hinkley is operational. Furthermore, and even more importantly, will reform the wider legal framework for future foreign investment in British critical infrastructure. These reforms will have three elements. Firstly, after Hinkley, the British government will take a special share in all future nuclear new build projects. This will ensure that significant stakes cannot be sold without the government's knowledge or consent. Secondly, the Office for Nuclear Regulation will be directed to require notice from developers or operators of nuclear sites of any change of ownership or part ownership. This will allow the government to advise or to direct the ONR to take action to protect national security as a result of change in ownership. And thirdly, the government will significantly reform its approach to the ownership and control of critical infrastructure to ensure that the full implications of foreign ownership are scrutinised for the purposes of national security. This will include a review of the public interest regime in the Enterprise Act 2002 and the introduction of a cross-cutting national security requirement for the continuing government approval of the ownership and control of critical infrastructure. These changes will bring Britain's policy framework for the ownership and control of critical infrastructure into line with other major economies. This will allow the UK government to take a fair and consistent approach to the national security implications of critical infrastructure, including nuclear energy, in the future. These changes mean that while the UK will remain one of the most open economies in the world, the public can be confident that foreign direct investment works always in the country's best interests. This £18 billion investment in Britain provides an upgrade in our supply of clean energy. When it begins producing electricity in the middle of the next decade, it will provide 7% of the UK's electricity needs, giving secure energy to 6 million homes for 60 years. Furthermore, it must be stressed that the contract negotiated places all the construction risk on investors alone. Consumers will not pay a penny unless and until the plant generates electricity. The proposed strike price of £92.50, reducing to £89.50 if Sizewell C is built, contains important elements of insurance against any cost overrun in construction and future high gas prices, which have historically been volatile. It compares broadly with the costs of other clean energy, whether offshore wind with the additional costs of intermittency, or gas with carbon capture and storage, for example. Hinkley unleashes a long overdue new wave of investment in nuclear engineering in the UK, creating 26,000 jobs and apprenticeships, providing a huge boost to the economy, not only in the southwest, but in every part of the country, through the supply chain of firms big and small that will benefit from the investment. EDF have also confirmed to me that UK businesses are set to secure 64% of the value of the £18 billion investment being made, the biggest single capital project in the UK today. But as the first of a wave of new nuclear plants, we expect the experience of rebooting the nuclear industry to mean that the cost should reduce for future new nuclear power stations, of which another 5 are proposed. Mr. Speaker, in any consideration of nuclear power, safety will always be the number one consideration. The construction of Hinkley Point C will be under the close scrutiny of the Office of Nuclear Regulation, which is independent of the industry and of ministers. The Office of Nuclear Regulation has the power necessary to halt construction or require amendments to any part of the plant if at any point it is not completely satisfied with the safety of any part of the reactor and its associated construction. Unlike in the past, the long-term decommissioning costs for the plant will be provided for explicitly as part of the funded decommissioning programme at a level that has been assessed independently as prudent and conservative. Mr. Speaker, any investment that provides significant electricity supplies for the next 2 generations of British people and businesses requires and deserves serious consideration. It was right that the new government should have taken the time to consider all components of the project. And now, having reviewed the project, the government is satisfied that the improved deal and the other changes announced today will, for the first time, remedy the weaknesses of the previous regime for foreign ownership of critical infrastructure. It's important that the right balance between welcoming foreign investment and ensuring that it serves the national interest is made. That is exactly what these changes will achieve. The investment will secure 7% of the UK's electricity needs for 60 years, helping replace existing nuclear capacity, which is due to be decommissioned in the decade ahead. The electricity generated will be reliable and low carbon, and so completely compatible with our climate change obligations. And Hinkley Point C will inaugurate a new era of UK nuclear power, with UK-based businesses benefiting from almost 2/3 of the £18 billion value of the project, with 26,000 jobs and apprenticeships created. All of these developments are good for Britain. It's now right that we support this major upgrade, the first of many, to the infrastructure on which our future depends. And I commend this statement to the House.
Mr. Gardner.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for the 13 minutes advance notice of his statement. First, let me be clear. This is an important project that must now go forward without any further interruption or delay. The Secretary of State is aware that by intervening on the 28th of July after EDF's final investment decision, the government put at risk 25,000 well-paid jobs, well-qualified jobs. He knows that the delay not only risked the £18 billion of investment into UK jobs and infrastructure, but also rocked confidence in investors who now believe that the Prime Minister doesn't understand the significance that companies attach to the taking of a final investment decision. He's aware of the Ernst & Young index that shows Britain has fallen from 4th to 13th in terms of attractiveness for low-carbon investment. This delay has only unsettled investors further. I now have a number of specific questions. First, in her meeting with President Xi, did the Prime Minister attempt in any way to isolate the building of the Hualong 1 reactor at Bradwell from the deal at Hinkley C? 2. If she did, what was the Chinese response? 3. Of course, every member of this House will agree that the government has primary responsibility to safeguard our national security. But neither the Secretary of State nor the Prime Minister have ever been clear about what they consider to be the security risks associated with the current deal. So will he set these out now, so that the House and the public can take a decision as to whether the modifications he is proposing adequately reflect the risks he believes exist? 4. Specifically, can he set out whether the government was concerned with security of the intellectual property associated with the EPR reactor? And if so, was he aware that 2 such reactors are already under construction in China in the form of the Taishan 1 and 2? 5. Were they concerned with the potential for a cyber attack? And if so, did he not consider that given the importance to the Chinese of having Bradwell as a kite mark standard in order to market their Hualong 1 reactor technology around the world, such an attack would undermine the very reason why the Chinese wanted to be involved in the project in the first place? 6. The Secretary of State wishes to dodge these questions. If he does, by pleading that he doesn't wish to discuss security matters, then I'd ask how he can assure the House and the public that the efficacy of the amendments he is proposing are sufficient to meet the risks and challenges that justified a near-fatal delay of this project. But, Mr. Speaker, we must address the sole argument that the government has actually presented, as well as those that they have not. They have claimed that they have introduced significant new safeguards into this package, in particular that they will be able to require notification from owners or operators of nuclear sites of any change of ownership or part ownership. But, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State already has such powers. Will the Secretary of State acknowledge that he can currently prevent the sale of any element of the UK's critical infrastructure? And this being the case, can he explain why he believes the proposed new powers add significantly to the public interest regulations in the Enterprise Act 2002? Or are they merely window dressing to make it appear that the government's intervention has achieved something, no matter how much appearances may indicate to the contrary? Is he aware of the House of Commons briefing paper entitled Mergers and the Public Interest Test? This particularly highlights that energy security is already covered by national security, and the government already has the powers to prevent such a sale. Is he also aware that in the House of Lords, during the passage of the Energy Act, my noble friend the Lord Putnam introduced an amendment specifically to introduce energy security as a new public interest term? Government lawyers then advised that, and I quote, in cases where a merger posed a genuine and serious threat to what is described as societal needs, such as energy supply, this would be covered by the existing provision in the 2002 Act regarding national security. So ministers would be empowered to directly intervene. Mr. Speaker, the government created a commercial crisis. They sent shockwaves through the industry and unions alike. They risked a diplomatic dispute with one of our key future trading partners. And in the end, all they've done is pretend to give themselves powers which they already possessed. This statement is window dressing. It is face saving by a government that talked big and eventually backed down with a whimper. The Secretary of State should explain whether he has reviewed changes to technology that have occurred in the past 10 years, and in particular smart grids, battery storage technology and energy efficiency measures to manage our electricity supply in such a way as to reduce our need for baseload power that Hinkley supplies.
Order. I think the honourable gentleman has concluded, has he not? Because his time's up. Sorry, thank you. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman raised a number of points, a large number of points, and I will address them. I think I hope, share the view that a confident long-term energy policy is vital to ensuring that people have access to secure energy that is affordable and that's clean, and that we should be a world leader in these important energy industries. But I hope he won't think it churlish of me to point out that it was the complete absence of a long-term energy policy during the 13 years in which Labour were in government, in which our nuclear fleet was known to be coming to the end of its life, and no decision was taken to replace them. It's fallen to this government to make the long-term decisions for the security of this country. And instead of the approach of making like the ostrich and hoping the problem would go away, this government is looking to the future, providing the upgrade to our long-term energy security that we need. And in terms of his position today, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I'm as confused by it as ever. His position is no more credible. He seemed to be criticising the Prime Minister and the government for taking the serious decision to review the components of a very important deal. That seems to be the import of his intervention. He said this had damaged confidence. But when the announcement was made on the 29th of July, the Honourable Gentleman told the BBC, I'm hoping that what the government will do, is to take 2 to 3 months to seriously review it. So much for the suggestion that we shouldn't have had this review in the first place. Mind you, I'm not sure what the purpose of this 2 or 3 months would be, because the very same day, as I have it, he said that he'd already made his mind up. He said that I wouldn't scrap the proposal, the project, because I welcome the jobs and I welcome the 7% of electricity that this will produce for the nation. So this is the honourable member that was urging the government to take longer to review something, the conclusions of which he'd already agreed in the first place. Mr. Speaker, the contrast between the seriousness and the forensic approach that this government has taken, I think, is marked. The points that the honourable gentleman raises, I will address. In terms of the powers under the Enterprise Act, they're subject to thresholds, takeover thresholds, and what we are doing is to make sure that any change in ownership or control of whatever size will be covered by a national security test, and that seems to be sensible. On the particular point of Hinkley, of course, it was the case until we had negotiated, or we proposed these changes to the contract, that EDF was at liberty to sell its stake, its majority stake, in this very important investment without even needing to have the permission of the UK government. So it seems to me no more than sensible and prudent to have agreed perfectly straightforwardly with EDF that there should be the consent of the British government required. And I'm surprised that the honourable gentleman, who I would have thought would take a prudent view of matters of national security, should suggest, and again it's not clear what he is suggesting, that we should not make these changes. When we come to debate these things in future, he will set out whether he opposes the measures that we're taking to safeguard and to entrench the same kind of regime for national security that we have in this country that other advanced economies enjoy. In terms of future investments, I was very clear in my statement that this is the first of what we hope will be a series of new nuclear investments. It is very important that we replace the just about 20% of power generated by nuclear power with another contribution to a diverse energy mix from nuclear. And in so doing, we are creating new jobs, new opportunities, and major advances for the UK economy.
Mr. John Redwood.
I welcome proposals to make it more difficult for foreign interests, especially nationalised interests and governments, to buy our crucial infrastructure. And does the Secretary of State agree with me that future power stations would be much better financed by private sector British investors, or even on occasion by Treasury investment, rather than foreign investors who will now be able to take enormous sums of money out of our country for 25 years or more while this project is up and running, which is a cost on the balance of payments that we really don't want?
Mr. Speaker, what I would say to my right honourable friend is that I welcome overseas investment of £18 billion into the UK economy. I hope as that we develop our nuclear programme and we develop the skills and the supply chain prospers, that there will indeed be British companies that will invest in the various parts of the supply chain of new nuclear. In fact, we expect that to happen, with 64% of the value going to UK companies. But I think it is an important part of the deal that the consumer and the taxpayer will not pay a penny for the construction costs unless and until it generates electricity. Now, knowing the record that there has been of cost overruns and delays to new nuclear power stations, I think it is prudent that risk is held by the investors rather than by the taxpayer in this case.
I thank the Secretary of State for advanced copy of the statement. Can I thank his Energy Minister for the courtesy call this morning to explain the Government's decision, and can I welcome the fact that we're having this statement before the recess to allow the opportunity for questions. I do think it is unfortunate, though, that the Government has decided to take the gamble with Hinkley. There are improvements that the Secretary of State have outlined, but the deal still remains a rotten one. The £30 billion that it will cost the bill payer. He may say that the risk is with EDF and the construction companies, but as Barclay outlined, a 25% over budget and 4 years late, and it will still make a profit. That profit will be at the expense of the bill payer. Now, if that risk there, if we don't pay a penny until it is built, or even if it is built late, what fills the gap? We know that coal is due to come off the system by 2025, when this is meant to be coming on. If that gap is there, if that gap is 5 years, what will fill it, and at what cost? So I think the cost of this project, possibly the biggest single object, most expensive object in history, is too much. But what really concerns me is the opportunity cost that we have here, because we can't spend the money twice, we can't have the engineers working on things twice, and we can't have the grid producing the electricity to be consumed twice. And we could spend this money better. We could use our expertise better, and we could use it to develop an industrial strategy, which this government has said is part of its new strategy. But that industrial strategy will mean foreign ownership, it will mean foreign investment, and it will mean foreign profit. And instead, we could be developing the homegrown industries that would see our country flourish, investing in clean carbon capture, investing in offshore wind, investing in storage, investing in solar. These things would all be better spent. So can I ask the Secretary of State to invest in the energy of the future, not the energy of the past?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the courteous words that the honourable gentleman started his remarks with, and he talks about investing in the future energy sources rather than the past. I gently point out to him that I think, given the SNP's record of energy forecasts in recent months, that perhaps they might keep their crystal balls to themselves, if I can put it that way. And again, in terms of understanding the injunction that the honourable gentleman gives to invest in renewables, very important, and he will know that Scotland has a very high proportion of renewable investment. But I'm confused by his party's position on this, because the SNP, as I understand it, has stood on a platform of nuclear-free Scotland. But it seems to be with their fingers crossed behind their back, because they're happy to rely on the two nuclear power stations functioning in Scotland, Hunterston B and Torness, that are producing low-carbon electricity. Indeed, his former leader of the party wrote to EDF to say that he was happy to extend the life of the two power plants well into the 2020s. So he wants to condemn his cake and eat it, and then have another slice, it seems to be. In terms of the points that he made about overseas investment, we do want to attract overseas investment into this country. It's a vote of confidence in this country that investors are working with us to have this major upgrade of our infrastructure. We welcome that across different sectors. And he's wrong that this is at the expense of opportunities that we have in this country. Because, of course, one of the features of this deal is it doesn't burden the public balance sheet. And the Chancellor and the Chief Secretary have been wise to make sure that the UK balance sheet remains able to support other investments, because this is provided through
Ian Liddell-Granger.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. With your indulgence, please could I thank the Secretary of State and my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for making exactly the right decision, and how important this is to the Bridgewater and West Somerset constituency. I therefore invite the Secretary of State to come down as soon as he practically can to visit the Hinkley Point C nuclear power station, and also say that would you look with some urgency at the nuclear college we now need to build with urgency at Cannington, but also further to my letter which I sent in from the LEP, that we need the last bit of the funding to make sure that the infrastructure to deal with this in the local area is therefore up to scratch, so that we can deliver this power plant on time, on budget, for the benefit of the United Kingdom.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I return the compliment and thank my honourable friend for his level-headedness and patience while this review has been conducted. It's an extremely important investment for his area. I am looking forward greatly to coming with him to visit Hinkley. And he's absolutely right that investments such as the college that will provide these skills that are going to charge ahead the whole of the southwest and indeed the rest of the country. The supply chain extends to all parts of the United Kingdom, and my honourable friend for Suffolk Coastal will also be a beneficiary of this. It does require an upgrade too in terms of the local infrastructure, and I will respond to the LEP on that. I had a very positive conversation with the Somerset Chamber of Commerce earlier this week, who were very clear that the benefits of what was then the proposal would be considerable, in fact game-changing for Somerset.
Sure.
he will be aware that Britain's two most respected economy and finance publications, the Financial Times and The Economist, have both come out very strongly against Hinkley C on value for money and on energy policy grounds, with The Economist describing it just last month as a white elephant before it's even built. Can he confirm that nothing he has announced today is an improvement on the dreadful deal negotiated by the former Chancellor on guaranteed price? Absolutely dreadful.
Well, I don't agree with the honourable gentleman. I think it is a good deal. It secures 7% of our energy into the future, and it's incumbent on him and his honourable friends to say, given that the 20% of nuclear capacity will be decommissioned over the next 10 years, how they're going to replace it if they're not going to be forward-looking and make positive decisions such as we've made.
John Whittingdale.
Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, which is good news for the energy sector and for my constituents in Bradwell-on-Sea. Can I assure him that my constituents welcome the prospect of Chinese investment in the Malden district, where there has been a long history of nuclear power generation? And does he agree that any future power station will be regulated by the UK Inspectorate, will be staffed by British employees, and that the Cyber Security Evaluation Centre, which assesses technology supplied by Huawei for the telecom sector, provides a very good precedent for addressing any security concerns?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and it seems to me important that we should welcome overseas investment, but that we should have a regime and a set of powers that other advanced economies benefit from. That is something that I think mature countries would expect to have, and that is what we're going to have as a result of these changes.
Tom Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having pressed the pause button, why is the Secretary of State now pressing the fast forward button? Doesn't he recognise that this project does not represent value for money, as the FT have pointed out? Does he accept that the cost to consumers has gone from 6 to 30 billion, and that now his government are willing to put in public subsidy, something they had said under coalition would not happen? And of course, this is happening at a time when the cost of renewables is plummeting.
No, Mr. Speaker, I've said that the construction cost is entirely financed by the private investors in this site. And again, I think it is important that we do have a long-term, consistent approach to energy policy. And I think insofar as this can be cross-party, I think that is beneficial. I think it's especially ironic that two Liberal Democrat energy secretaries were closely involved in the negotiation of this deal. We have a different view already.
Zach Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could my right honourable friend confirm that at the end of its life, this new power plant will have generated the most expensive energy in the history of energy generation? And can you tell us if he agrees with the National Audit Office that in its lifetime, consumers will have ended up subsidising EDF to the tune of £30 billion? And finally, can you tell us what's going to happen to the mountains of nuclear waste this plant will generate?
Mr. Speaker, what I would say to my honourable friend is that the securing for 60 years a reliable source of energy is a good investment in the future of stability for our energy supplies, and that's worth having. And of course, it's impossible to know what the alternatives would be during that time, and we have seen very volatile energy prices. So Winston Churchill's principle on energy security was that diversity and diversity alone was the key. I think that is the right approach. When it comes to decommissioning, as I said in my earlier answer, this is provided for explicitly in the contract.
Gary McCarthy.
EDF say that this will mean 1,500 jobs at offices in Bristol, as well as the jobs associated with the plant. I'm meeting with them on Monday and going down to Hinkley to discuss that. But these are incredibly expensive jobs, given what we've already heard about the deal. Does the Minister really think that this is value for money, and would it perhaps not be better spent investing in the renewable sector, which would also mean jobs in the southwest?
Well, I do, and I'm slightly confused as to the demeanour of the party opposite, who it seemed in the rather confusing reply of the Shadow Minister to be welcoming the project going ahead. Certainly, the trade unions in the southwest West and across the country, which I would imagine the Honourable Lady speak to, are very positive. The National Secretary for Energy for the GMB said giving the thumbs up to Hinkley is vital to fill the growing hole in the UK's energy supply needs. Frances O'Grady of the TUC has welcomed it. I think when she goes back to her constituency this weekend, she might talk to some of the unions who are delighted on behalf of their members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome this announcement that it brings £465 million worth of contracts to South West businesses and a £4 billion boost to the South West economy. But would the Minister agree, or the Secretary of State agree, that we've got to look at these decisions in the context of the fact that we have a fleet of nuclear power stations from the 1960s and 70s that are going to close over the next 10 years? And these decisions aren't about either or, either this or others, we need both.
Well, that is exactly why long-term planning is essential. We have around, as I say, 20%, about 19% of our electricity generated by nuclear power. If we don't renew it, it will fall to 2% by 2030. It seems to be the prudent thing to do to get on with replacing that.
Sue Hayman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the decision that's been taken. It's been a long time coming, and it's a shame that it's been delayed over and over again. My constituency has Moorside Power Station that will be built, hopefully, in the not-too-distant future, which is incredibly important for the economic development. Can the Secretary of State reassure me that the future new Chernobyl programme will not be beset by delay after delay after delay?
We are one of the reasons we're so keen to inaugurate this new programme of nuclear engineering in this country is to be able to replace the nuclear power stations that are being decommissioned, but to build up in constituencies and communities like hers those skills that can make a valuable contribution to local life and to our national economy.
Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the building of the new fleet, or the starting of the building of the new fleet of nuclear power stations, and the opportunity it provides for British manufacturing. Will my right honourable friend do all he can to ensure that in these deals we buy the best of British?
Well, indeed, I have agreed with EDF in the last 24 hours that they have made a commitment to me that 64% by value of the content will be spent with UK companies, which shows the tangible benefits to the whole economy of this programme.
George Caravan.
The Minister said that the Hinkley decision won't burden the national balance sheet. So could he clarify the status of the offer made by the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer to give EDF a Treasury guarantee of £2 billion to supplement the company's liquidity? An offer NAO says puts the taxpayer at risk.
I'm delighted to answer that question. In fact, EDF have confirmed to me that they will not be taking up that £2 billion guarantee, so that the taxpayer is fully insulated from the costs of construction.
Mr. Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today. Can he confirm that he'll continue to work with business groups like the China-Britain Business Council and the French Chamber of Commerce in the UK to make sure we build on this nuclear partnership and attract future investment into the UK?
I will indeed, Mr. Speaker. We do want to have good investment opportunities for countries around the world, and China right across the United Kingdom has been an important and valued source of investment, and it's important that we build on that.
Diana Johnson.
In light of the announcement today, is the Secretary of State now admitting that when the government entered into the original contract, they failed to protect national security and critical infrastructure?
No, what I would say to the Honourable Lady, despite the injunction of her colleague on the front bench, is that taking the opportunity seriously to review before signatures were given has allowed us to improve the security of the arrangements. That seems to be a wholly good thing that I hope she'd welcome.
Mark Menzies.
Speaker, the Secretary of State is quite right to point out that nuclear energy provides a valuable part of UK energy security, but that's only provided that we have the fuel in order to put in them. The fuel for reactors in the UK, Mr. Speaker, are made in my constituency and filed. Can the Secretary of State assure me that all efforts will be made to ensure that nuclear fuel for new reactors for the UK will be made in the UK where at all possible?
Well, indeed, and I'd be happy to visit my honourable friend's constituency to see for myself the production facilities.
Matthew Pennycook.
I very much welcome the review, but I've got to say I'm astonished that a review of the strike price was not part of that. A strike price which will rise to close to £120 per megawatt hour by the mid-2020s and rising with inflation thereafter. Can I ask the Secretary of State whether a serious examination of the cost and value for money for bill payers was part of the review?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, we looked at every component part, and I think for a new nuclear power station, the first for a generation in this country, to have it constructed at no risk to the taxpayer or the bill payer, I think is a considerable achievement and represents good value.
David Morris.
Mr. Speaker, this is good news for my constituency, as it means now that we're going to have a third nuclear power station built. Good news travels fast. I've already had the local radio station desperate to get an interview, and also to congratulate the Secretary of State for all his hard work of what he's done for my constituents. Would he agree with me that we could meet together very shortly to have a meeting how we can speed up the 5 proposed reactors in the future? And also, would he help me in Heysham as quick as he possibly can?
I'd be very happy, as always, to meet my honourable friend and consider the invitation accepted.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, we have an excellent Secretary of State, and he's come to this House and made a very full statement.
Yeah.
But he gave details of the statement, quite rightly, to the opposition spokesman, the SNP statement, but he also gave it in advance to the BBC. I read all of this on the BBC website. That's not how this House works. And it may be that pressure of spin doctors are still prevalent in departments. That has got to stop. The House has to be informed first. And would the Secretary agree that is the convention of this House?
I understand the point that my honourable friend makes, and I hope he will concede that I've come to the House at the earliest opportunity. Decisions like this have consequences for financial markets, and it is the norm to, at the opening of the markets, to disclose them. He can be absolutely assured, and I'm sure he will accept this, that my sense of responsibility to this House is very clear in my mind, but we need to have an orderly conduct of business when it comes to important implications for financial markets too.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement on golden shares, and I also very much support what my right honourable friend for Wokingham said about future British investment, perhaps through a UK investment bank and UK pension funds, as being very important. But can he confirm to me where the currency risk, particularly on the subsidy payments in the future out of the CFDs, will arise?
Mr. Speaker, the contract is expressed in pounds, and as I say, the construction risk is entirely with the investors.
Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the long-term investment in low-carbon energy and the 25,000 jobs this will create. But could the Secretary of State confirm EDF's commitment to local jobs and to small and medium-sized businesses in the supply chain, such as James Fisher Nuclear in my constituency?
Well, I'm sure that particular firm will attest to that. Certainly the Somerset Chamber of Commerce were very clear that the orders that had been placed already during the period of preparation of the site has been very beneficial to that county.
Tom Persglove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is obviously a massive infrastructure project, and I welcome what the Secretary of State has had to say around the opportunities for UK supply chains, and I hope that that opportunity will extend to the steel industry, and I would strongly urge the Secretary of State to get out there and make the case that all of the steel used in this project should be British. And can I put in a particular plug for Corby tubes?
Which are of excellent quality, I know. Certainly, I think the commitment that EDF have given me, that 64% by value of the work will be with UK firms, will be of particular benefit to firms such as the one he mentions and to the supply chain right across the country.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State. Order. Questions to the Secretary of State for Transport, Victoria Atkins.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of State at the Department of Transport, Minister John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, the
an assessment of the impact of the economy as a routine part of transport and investment decisions. The Department uses an internationally respected analytical framework for assessing schemes, which includes the impacts on jobs, growth and regeneration.
Atkins.
May I welcome the Minister to his place and say how pleased I am that the Department has the benefit of his experience and wisdom of my Lincolnshire colleague. And I'm not just saying that because I'd like his help with a road, please. Every day this summer, my constituents, tourists and I had to wait up to 45 minutes to pass through the traffic lights at the Bullring in Horncastle, where the very busy A153 crosses the even busier A158. These single carriageway roads cannot cope with the volume of traffic between the city of Lincoln, the market town of Louth and the East Coast. Will my right honourable friend meet me and local councillors to discuss what can be done to get rid of these bottlenecks, to help local residents and businesses, and to encourage even more tourism to the wonderful Lincolnshire coast?
Minister of State Hayes.
Well, the honourable lady is a doughty and articulate campaigner in her constituents' interests, Mr. Speaker. She will know that all counties of our great country are dear to my heart, but none more so than my own county of Lincolnshire. I am familiar with this part of the county. I do understand the pressures on the roads there. I will be more than happy to meet our councillors to discuss it. Indeed, I want to go further, Mr. Speaker, because that's not good. That's just not alone good enough. I want to hold a round-table meeting with all concerned parties in my department and ask my officials to look specifically what she said. If I might say so, her complimentary words were most welcome. She could have added, for future reference, dexterity, determination, in the light of recent events, durability.
Mrs. Louise Elman.
Will the Minister give a firm commitment for High Speed 2 to go ahead with a very clear timetable? And will he accelerate work in Transpennine links from Liverpool to Hull so that the UK's economy can be supported and this can assist in the rebalancing of the economy across the whole of the UK?
Well, the Honourable Lady and I, Mr. Speaker, were together earlier this week a meeting discussing a whole range of issues in the light of the IPPR report, including the significance of that Transpennine connection. It is very important that we see all of our transport needs, not just in terms of north-south links, but also in terms of east-west links. And I know a number of members that represent constituencies on the east of England like I do, and the west of England like she does, will recognise that. I'm more than happy to look at all those options. She will know we are considering a range of ways of making those links real. She, in her role as Select Committee Chairman, will want to test me further on those subjects when no doubt she calls me before her.
Sir Alan Hazelhurst.
Will my right honourable friend have particular regard to the reports from the Great Eastern and West Anglian task forces chaired by two of his colleagues about the contribution they can make to the future prosperity of the Anglian region, so that there can be a reliable rail structure on which the splendid new trains that are to come can run more efficiently?
Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, I have a deep regard for the past, and my relatively recent past reminds me that the right honourable gentleman tested me on these matters in my last incarnation in the Department of Transport, when he made similar arguments about the importance of those links. I do look forward to receiving and studying that report, and when I do so, I'm more than happy to have further discussions with him on its contents, but no one can argue that he hasn't made his case powerfully and repeatedly.
I hope the right honourable gentleman, member for Saffron Walden, realises how lucky he is at the prospect of further conversations with the Minister of State. Not all of us are in that category. Ruth Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Infrastructure is vital for economic growth, which is why it's so unfortunate that the Highways Agency has, without consultation, announced the closure of the A34 at Talk Junction. This stretch of road is the main access route to the Freeport shopping centre. Much needed works are required, but it's due to start next week until December 23rd at a Christmas shopping centre. will the Minister endeavour to work with me to work with the Highways Agency so they can see the error of their ways?
Mr. State.
If I might, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, make a general point and then a specific one. The general point is the first day I was in this particular job, I met the Highways England, as they're now called, and was very clear that one of the things they have to do better is to give proper notice of plans which they have, to communicate with all interested parties, including members of this House, and to be very clear indeed about the length of time particular decisions they make and their implications will take. And obviously, the case in point is Apposite. On the specific, I wasn't aware of it, but this is what I'm going to do. I will meet my Highways England today, this day, and I will raise that particular issue, and by tomorrow I will speak to the Honourable Lady about it.
Ed Vasey.
My right honourable friend is dexterous, determined and durable, as well as extremely distinguished. The A34 is one of the most important roads for our economy, taking as it does freight from the south coast through to the Midlands. It's becoming increasingly dangerous. 2 recent crashes cause fatalities. Will my right honourable friend, now that I have recalled that he is dexterous, determined and durable, hold a round table with me and other Oxfordshire MPs to discuss how to improve safety and the free running of the A34?
Minister of State.
My table grows ever more round, Mr. Speaker. I'm none the worse for it, by the way, but I am familiar with that road. He will know it's a scheme which has had a number of suggestions made for its improvement. It is important that the House understands that there are always demands on different roads and different ideas about how those demands can be met. And the process that we're engaged in is one where we study those things carefully, and part of that is the kind of consultation the honourable gentleman recommends. I'm always delighted to speak to him about any matter before this House, including the one he's raised today.
Mr. Graham-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the government talks about rebalancing the economy, and it's interesting that the Minister just said about improving east-west links in the north. Well, can I make one suggestion that I hope he'll take forward? Can we extend the M65 all the way to Scotch Corner? This needs to be done. There are millions of people in the north east who need connecting directly to millions of people in the northwest in the Manchester region, and this would be a vital east-west infrastructure link that would rebalance that economy.
Well, again, the honourable gentleman is known for making that case, and the case of the links that would be sufficient to give further boost to his economy. There have been scurrilous suggestions that the Northern Powerhouse has faltered in some way. Let me tell you this. The Northern Powerhouse is not only alive and well, it will thrive under this government, and that will include the kind of infrastructural investments necessary not only to provide transport links, but to boost economic growth, build skills and spread opportunity. That's the kind of government we are, Mr. Speaker, a government with big ideas that puts into action for the benefit of our people.
Lillian Greenwood.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Paul Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the unpaused electrification, Networks Rail have remobilised their team and are working towards a final design for the enhancement programme as set out in the Henry Review last year. Work to increase capacity on this route has already started.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Speaker, the East Midlands region has had the lowest level of rail spending per head in every one of the last 6 years. We've discovered that the pausing and unpausing of the electrification of Midland Main Line wasted almost £40 million and cost countless jobs in the supply chain. And now there are rumours that it could be cancelled or deferred again. Will he take this opportunity to confirm that the line will be electrified all the way to Nottingham and Sheffield by 2023? And will he commit to real action to ensure there are no further delays or broken promises?
Minister.
Well, I congratulate her on assiduously still carrying out her former brief. Who knows when she might return to the front bench to continue in that role. She makes an important point about the importance of this line to the East Midlands. In my view, the supply chain in the East Midlands doesn't just depend, I think, upon this one project. The investment in Bombardier, 660 trains for East Anglia, is just one way of safeguarding that particular supply chain. But the wider point she makes about the work on this line, it's worth bearing in mind that we've already completed 10 kilometres of new line in this stretch. Nearly 9 kilometres of new existing line improved as well. Over 3,000 new piles put into place, 10 kilometres of new earthworks, strengthening of creek bridges, new viaducts, particularly at Harper's Brook. So the work is ongoing on this particular line, and we're looking to improve capacity as well with the franchising arrangements.
Mr Speaker, I'm delighted to hear that the Northern Powerhouse is alive and well. And would the Minister agree with me that if it is to have real effect, then it's important that investment in connectivity, not just between cities, but also between the towns of the north, is made? And I'd like to thank Ministers for the initial investment in the Middlewich bypass, but would Ministers also look at the business case for the reopening of the Middlewich railway station?
Well, as someone born and bred in a town very close to Middlewich, another one of the salt towns in Northwich, I am well aware in my 40 years of the importance of Middlewich's connectivity at the heart of Cheshire. I know there are good plans for Middlewich's new station, and I look forward to working with her on progressing that business case.
I bet.
Before the pause, the electrification was due to be completed by 2020. That is also the date when all trains have to comply with the new disability legislation. What's the government now going to do between 2020 and 2023 when the old HST trains on the line with their slam doors don't comply with disability legislation? Is the government going to abandon the legislation or put in temporary rolling stock?
Well, we take accessibility issues on our railways extremely seriously, and the gentleman is right to point out the commitments we have made. We're currently examining how best to increase capacity on this particular line, particularly at peak hours when there is a risk of standing on some stretches. So we're looking very carefully at how we can deliver on this.
Nigel Mills.
In the plans to re-energise the electrification, will the Minister ensure that the branch line that runs through Langley Mill and Alfreton stations in my constituencies added into that plan, having been unaccountably missed out of the original one?
I am not familiar with that particular branch line at this stage, but I shall certainly look into it, discuss with my officials and write to the honourable gentleman.
With the faster line speeds that electrification will bring, will the Minister look to reinstate the half-hourly service northwards from Kettering that was cut to an hourly service under the last Labour government?
Minister.
There are always a number of timetabling and scheduling opportunities that come about through any reprofiling of a line, and indeed any change in the rolling stock that works on it. So we will, of course, feed that into all the consultations that will occur as to how we best make use of the reprofiling of that line.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Number 3.
Minister of State Hayes.
Mr Speaker, the safety of the public is our top priority. We're working closely with the CAA and industry to understand and address the safe use of drones. We are continuing to adapt and strengthen the regulations as the use of drones evolves. The current regulatory framework balances clear rules on safety and strong penalties for misuse with the commercial permission system, which ensures responsible use of this emerging technology.
Kevin Brennan.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. But I asked him what assessment he'd made of the effect on aviation safety. How real is this risk? I know he knows that it was discussed at the Trade Union Congress this week and there's great concern about it, but we really need to know what the risk is and what steps the government is taking before we end up with the inevitable ministerial statement about lessons learned.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. I mean, he's right about the TUC discussing it yesterday, and we had a word about that earlier. They're right to raise this too, because of course it's an emerging technology and the risk is dynamic. We need to keep constant analysis in place about what that poses, and it's not just irresponsible use, it could be malevolent use. You can imagine, Mr Speaker, drones could be used by all kinds of agents to do all kinds of things. So the assurance I give him is that I will make sure that my department is continuing that analysis, making sure the regulatory framework is fit for purpose, having done that analysis. And I think the best thing to do on that is for me to come back to the House and give regular reports on how that's going. The honourable gentleman always takes a diligent interest in the affairs of this House, and he's raised an important issue which I think is entirely bipartisan actually, but one we need to take very seriously.
Fabricant.
My constituent Leslie Smith administers Tutbury Castle, and she tells me that, drones are not only an issue of danger to aircraft, but also it affects privacy, it affects it affects copyright law, and also is a danger to people who might be visiting the castle and then the drone running out of power and falling on people's heads. So when are we going to see tighter instructions and education about how to use drones? Intellectual property rights, Mr. Speaker, incidentally, was the phrase I was searching for earlier.
But you found it.
I found it.
Well, just to be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, we do take drones very seriously, as I said in answer to the first question. And anyone who, quote, recklessly or negligently causes or permits their drone to endanger any person or property can face a fine currently of up to £5,000 or 2 years imprisonment. So we're not taking this matter lightly. But I think the point that my honourable friend makes and the honourable gentleman opposite made is because this technology is evolving, it's very important that we do proper work to look at the scale and type of danger we face, and then the regulatory framework can be fit for purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just wondering if the Department have any cooperation with the MOD in relation to security and that threat that drones pose for the security of the nation.
Minister of State.
Indeed. Obviously, given that I've recently arrived back at the DFT from the Home Office, where I was the Minister for Security, that was something that the MOD and the Home Office took very seriously indeed. So he can be absolutely sure that across government we're looking at this matter because, as I said earlier, it's not just about irresponsible use, it may be malevolent use of the kind that he implies.
Margaret Ferrier.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
The Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer this question together with question 7. The Government is committed to delivering the important infrastructure projects that this country needs, including delivering runway capacity in the South East on the timetable set by the Airports Commission. We're currently undertaking further work, including assurance of the Airports Commission's evidence and on air quality, and our decision will be made shortly.
Margaret Ferrier.
The new Transport Secretary, a fierce advocate of the UK exiting the EU, has done more than enough already to wreak economic havoc. Perhaps he would care to use his new position to mitigate some of this damage by putting an end to this third runway debacle. And if not, will he apologise to businesses and commuters in Scotland for putting their economic interests on the line?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would simply remind the Honourable Lady that some of the things that were said about our economy have not proved to be the case, and that actually under this government our economy continues to do well. What I'd also say to her is that this government retains and will always retain a commitment to the economy and the people of Scotland as part of one United Kingdom, and the decision we seek to take on runway capacity in the South East, whatever it may be, Mr. Speaker, will be a decision that is also designed to benefit the whole United Kingdom by improving our connectivity to the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When reminded of his words, no ifs, no buts, no third runway, the previous Prime Minister said it would be this summer. I think the current position from the government is all October for a decision on Heathrow, although the current Prime Minister seems to be erasing all evidence of her previous opposition to this. After £20 million and the Davis debacle, it does look like it's going to be a free vote. Can he confirm or deny this? Because to my constituents, it looks like a protracted vote.
Order, we do need shorter questions.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Honourable Lady is going to have to wait for us to set out our plans. I've said today we're committed to taking the decision shortly. I regard this as an important decision for our nation, one we need to get on with. We have, of course, seen a significant change in administration across the summer. It is right and proper that the Prime Minister and I are sufficiently prepared to take the decision we need to take, and we will make sure we are suitably prepared.
Sir Simon Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that if we want to keep London as the hub airport for Western Europe, it is crucial that we deal with the capacity problems that currently affect Heathrow in particular? This saga has been going on for so long. Can I ask my right honourable friend that he ensures that we don't have any further delays in reaching a conclusion on the Davis recommendations, and that can I tell him that there is only one obvious answer, and that is Heathrow.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as you know, there are differing opinions across this House. It is right and proper that the government looks at all the three options recommended to us by the Davis Commission in a dispassionate way, assess the strengths and weaknesses of what is offered, and take the right decision in the interests of our nation. And I can assure this House that is what we will do.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, as Britain leaves the European Union, we're going to have to develop more markets in Asia and the Far East. That's going to mean more passenger traffic and particularly more freight traffic. Is it not therefore essential in the national interest that River Oaks plans for a freight hub at Manston are allowed to proceed, to be successful, and that we preserve Manston as an airport in the national interest?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely understand how strongly people in Thanet feel about the future of Manston. I know how controversial it is and it has been. I can simply say to him that this government would be perfectly supportive of proposals to develop a freight hub at Manston, but of course it has to be, I'm afraid, a matter for the local community, the owners, the local authority, and I hope it's the right decision in the interest of the nation.